This is the Open Floor NBA podcast where we talk about the league and all the big stories. On this episode, we're going to get into the Celtics midseason struggles, Jimmy Butler's suspension ending in Miami, the Warriors stars pushing for Golden State not to make trades, if you can believe that, and the Houston Rockets rise to contender status. Joining me to discuss all of this, man, you are familiar with. You are a longtime Open Floor listener. From the Washington Post, longtime NBA reporter, Ben Golliver. What's happening, Ben? How are you?
I'm good, Chris. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I know you were also Southern California based. Everything good in your neck of the woods?
Thankfully, I mean, you just knock on wood every single day. It's been a crazy week and a half out here. The Lakers played their first game. I can't tell you how emotional that scene was. The Lakers game where they're trying to kind of fight through. Certain guys have been evacuated, and guys aren't able to get to practice because freeways are closed. And Michael Cooper is getting his jersey retired like 35 years after he retired from his playing career. And he's a Pasadena native. He's saying he's got middle schools that he went to that were completely lost. And here he has, at this great moment of his career to get the jersey retirement, and he's got all these mixed feelings. So it was a very challenging night there, but everybody's trying to move forward as best they can.
Yeah, very emotional for a lot of guys. JJ Redick, of course, lost everything. He was living in a rental in the Pacific Palisades, but all his family possessions. I thought it was a cool moment after that game against the Spurs where Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul took off their jerseys and gave them to JJ's kids. JJ's kids, avid collectors who lost everything in that fire. So very cool to see Wembanyama and Chris Paul do that. You know what, Ben? I don't think JJ's kids are going to sell Wembanyama's jersey like that jackass did when Wembanyama gave his jersey to a kid a few games ago. Great moment for the NBA. Wembanyama gives his jersey to the kid, and all of a sudden, the jersey shows up on eBay like a couple of days later.
Yeah,
Crazy.
reporters like us need to track down the kid because I don't think the kid posted it, right? I'm probably the kid wanted to keep that thing. It's unfortunate that that's how people go about their business. I saw Webby had the little tears emoji on social media. Totally warranted. I don't know if there was a real life tears, but if I'm Wembanyama, I'm saying I'm trying to help somebody out. I'm trying to make someone's day. This is the thanks I get, and I imagine 99 fans out of 100 would want to keep that jersey forever. The price is only going up. It's a bad business move if you think about it. Just maybe wait 10 years until you list that thing, right? You're going to get a lot more for it once this guy's got MVPs and championships on his resume.
That's a great point because you have evidence that it's game worn. If you hold
Yeah.
on to it for 10 years, 20 years, when this guy's in the Hall of Fame and probably an all-time great, the price is exponentially larger. I mean, putting aside, you shouldn't be selling it to begin with. You gave it to the kid. Like, let the kid frame it and have it his. If the kid wants to sell it 20 years from now, fine. But, put it on eBay right now is
When, when the kid's applying to college, it could be his college fund if he wants to sell it. That's how I look at it, right?
that is a solid use of a Wembanyama jersey to pay school tuition. I can approve of that. Anything else, not so much. Ben, I want to start talking about the Boston Celtics, who have hit something of a midseason rut. They lost by double digits to the Raptors on Wednesday. That's a team they beat by 50 the last time out. Celtics have now lost 3 of the last 5. One of those wins came during the stretch was a squeaker of a win over New Orleans. Are you concerned at all by what you're seeing from Boston?
Yes, I am. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I'm not worried. I'm not worried. You should be worried. I mean, we know that this championship hangover thing is a real thing. That's why the phrase championship hangover exists. They were so dominant. Everything looked so easy last year, and it just hasn't looked that easy consistently this year. There's been some high moments where they're just running teams off the court. Don't get me wrong, but this has gone on long enough where I'm starting to be concerned. Number one, the health issues have mounted. None of them have been huge, but they've just kind of been here or there, missing some key guys from the lineups. The other thing that I wonder about too is they play so formulaically, and it's for better and worse, right? Like that's one of their strengths, but it's also potentially it could be their undoing when you're that reliant upon the 3-point shot with your offense. You live and die by the three. Is it harder to get up night after night to play a formulaic style That's what I'm wondering because I can understand over the course of an 82 game season, the games don't really matter. You pretty much know who you have to go through too, right? Like it's going to come down to them or Cleveland. Maybe Milwaukee and New York could factor in a little bit, but that's going to be who is waiting there come April. Is it harder to get through these January games on the road against these bad teams when your style is so formulaic, when it's just kind of the same thing night after night after night? Just something I wonder about.
Um, those people you talk about that aren't worried about Boston, I am one of them. I am.
Really?
I can't get worried about a tough few weeks or however long it's been in December, January. I can't do it. I just can't.
So they can
Yeah,
flip the switch back on in your mind.
yeah. I mean, look, if we were having the same conversation in early March, I'd probably have a different opinion. But because we're in that, the literal dog day part of the schedule, right? The tough part of the schedule when, look, it's cold in Boston, it's colder in a place like Toronto. It's tough to get motivated for some of these games. They played New Orleans and the Pelicans have a shitty record. Like look, it's not. It needs to be fixed, no question about that. And there are things like to be concerned about. The 3-point shooting has been off. The defense has been sloppy. I look at some of Drew Holiday's numbers. I don't like him. I look at some of Derek White's recent numbers. I don't like him. There are reasons to be concerned, but every team that has won has gone through something like this. You go back to some of those Warriors years. They went
Yeah.
through some early funks. I mean, how many regular seasons during LeBron's second tour of duty with Cleveland they just sleepwalk through? And granted,
Yeah.
it's LeBron and he's the ultimate switch flipper. But didn't they make one run to the finals as like the 5 seed or 4 seed? I mean, like
Yeah.
this.
No,
I'm not trying to put the Celtics in that category because they've only won one championship and they don't have a LeBron James. But last year's championship was like the culmination of a 6-year, battle to get to that spot. All those conference finals, the trip to the NBA finals in 2022, the ups and downs, the trade room, everything that went on, and they finally reached the mountaintop. I'm going to give them a little attitude here. I'm going to say, you know what? If you're just kind of stinking out the joint against Toronto and New Orleans and some of these other teams in December, January, I'm going to choose not to care. I'm going to choose not to feel a certain type of way about this. If after the All-Star break we're seeing the same things, then yeah, I'll have more concern. But right now, if we're doing the concernometer, 1 being not at all, 10 being set the red alert, I'm at like a 1.5 right now, Ben. I got to tell you.
well, that's good. They need that. I'm not saying I'm at 10. I might be at like a 5 or a 6. They were so dominant in last year's playoffs. That's the question to me because everything broke right for them. So many injuries to opposing players. The matchups were super favorable. Did they ever really get tested in the playoffs? I mean, I don't know. You could argue, I guess at times, Dallas, made it a little interesting, but not really. I mean, that was one of the easiest postseason runs we've ever seen. So that makes me wonder, well, how are they going to respond if there is some adversity? And this isn't crazy adversity, but this is something that they need to pull through. Are they on the level of a Golden State Warriors team that you're talking about where, okay, it gets tough, we flip a switch, we run away from everybody and we go back to back? Well, I don't know if they're that talented. I think they're very talented, right? And they've got a lot of future Hall of Famers on that team, but I'm not sure I see a defining transcendent player like a peak Kevin Durant or a peak Stephen Curry or peak LeBron James, like you were referencing earlier. So that to me is really one of the most fascinating storylines heading into the postseason. Is their collection of talent good enough to make us forget completely about what January looked like? Or if they're facing some tougher competition, is it going to look as easy as it did last time? I find it very hard to believe that they're going to get through this year's playoffs if they have to play Cleveland and potentially Oklahoma City. I think both those teams are better matchups for Boston than any of the teams they faced in last year's playoffs.
Oh, they're tough. I'll give you that. I'd even think that had Denver gotten through the Western
Yeah.
Conference, they would have been a tougher matchup for Boston. I think the Celtics just matched up really well with Dallas with their defensive guards, and obviously those guys they were ready for that moment. Like that was their breakthrough type of moment. The jury's out to me on Cleveland in the playoffs. We'll see what happens there. I do think Oklahoma City is going to be really tough if they get to the finals because they're like the Boston of the West. I mean, they're built a lot like the Celtics there. And look, if you want to say the Celtics need to add something, I think they'd probably agree with you. I mean,
What would you add?
I I think backup big would be a
Yeah.
priority. I think Luke Cornett's a fun guy, and I think the Cornett contest is a fun move. But I think when we get to the playoffs, I think they'd probably like to have one more big in that rotation. Like if I'm Brad Stevens, I'm probably digging up Danny Ainge's old number and seeing what it would take to get Walker Kessler. That's a guy I
Mm.
think that would make some sense with the Celtics. And because he's on that rookie contract, you can do a deal with a team like this. Have to fork over, probably at least one first round pick. I'm sure Danny would want a pound of flesh from the Celtics, like he wants from every team. But I think that's probably an area where I think that they actually have a need. Like I'm just not going to get concerned about Drew Holiday, who in the last couple of years has proven to be a big time shot maker in big situations, and Derek White, who's been the same. Like the guards are fine. Tatum and Brown are going to be fine. Porzingis is fine, but it's just if you need to go a little deeper into that bench, I think I'd like to have some other alternative than the combination of Luke Cornett, Xavier Tillman, Namus Keita. Like there's just I need something else in that mix.
Seems like it's been a lot of Kita over the last like month or
Yeah.
so. Maybe it's just because those minutes feel a little bit more challenging to watch than some of their other big man options. So I'm with you. Front court depth makes sense. I will say it's a little bit more intimidating when Wemby tries to block the jump shots from 20 feet away than it is when Cornette tries to do it. Might need to change the name of that Cornette contest because Wemby's been doing some of that stuff, now and then in his second season. But in terms of their front court depth issues, though, they were able to get by without Porzingis, I think, in the finals because the matchup was so favorable, right? Like
Mhm.
there are other matchups where I think that could have been exploited potentially. And if I'm Boston, I definitely want to have Porzingis healthy 100% if you have to go against Milwaukee, for example, right? And do they get pushed and pressed in different ways if Porzingis is just can't be relied upon? That's the number one reason to me why you would try to make a move is just to get yourself some injury insurance so it's not on Al in the bench.
Yeah, I don't see a 16-3 postseason run for the Celtics this year. If they do wind up repeating as champions, I think it's going to be a tough go of it because there are going to be some. You mentioned Milwaukee, New York. If they're fully healthy, that's a tough matchup for them too. Yeah, I think it's beefing up the roster with something. Particularly the front court, I think is a good idea. All right, let's talk a little bit about Jimmy Butler, whose suspension is officially over. The 7-game rip that Miami gave Butler last week is up. The Heat went 3-4 without Jimmy Butler and now must decide what to do with him. For whatever it's worth, Ben, Kevin Love, who has been rather hilariously chronicling this entire Jimmy Butler situation on Instagram, posting that Wolf of Wall Street scene where he says, "I'm coming back." Jimmy Butler liked that post, so we're now back to interpreting social media posts. What do we make of this situation now? Is it tenable to bring Jimmy Butler back? Do they sit him down? Like maybe when people listening to the show, this will already be resolved. But right now, we really don't know what Butler's going to do or Miami's going to do with Jimmy Butler.
Well, there's so many layers to performance art to this whole thing, right? Like you got Jimmy in the coffee shop, you got Kevin Love on Instagram, you got Dwayne Wade giving these inspiring speeches on podcasts, you got the image of Pat Riley, the old school deal maker, the traditionalist who's not going to take any flack from anybody. I feel like everyone in this soap opera has done an amazing job of playing their role. And I don't know if it's actually helped or hurt the Heat, but it's given everybody a lot of content online. If I'm the Heat, I don't bring Jimmy Butler back until after the trade deadline. I want to sort this out. I think that it's gotten ugly enough and distracting enough where it's not in the best interest of the organization. They're about 500 with Jimmy in the lineup, and they're about 500 without Jimmy. I'm not sure that, in the short term regular season, you'd prefer to have him if he's invested and playing well. But I don't think it's a crippling blow if you don't have him. They're a couple weeks away from this trade deadline. I wouldn't treat it as a suspension. I would just say, hey, you're on vacation here as we try to sort through these trade scenarios and see what we look like. Play some of these younger guys, give them a little bit more opportunities, continue to ride Tyler Hero, and just see where it goes. I think you send a weird message to your group. You put everybody back into purgatory. Is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? What are our roles? How many touches does he want? I just think it's bad for the group. So I just say, hey, stay home, Jimmy. You're your PTO, right? And we'll readdress it after the trade deadline if we can't move you. But I would not be rushing to shake this up again. How do you feel?
Yeah, but Miami hates to do that, right? Like that's just not in their DNA to send talent home. Now maybe this
Yeah.
is a a unique circumstance, right? Because not only is it like Jimmy Butler's unhappy, but it's Jimmy Butler versus Pat Riley. And the reporting this week is that Jimmy and Pat met face to face, and Jimmy told him it's the other part of it. Like Jimmy told Pat Riley reportedly that he's not going to sign an extension with Miami that was never offered, and he might opt out of a contract that they'd love for him to opt out of. Like it was just been some wild. Plus the leak that, and I think this was Chris Haynes that reported this, the leak that at some point last summer, Miami, because of a clerical error, didn't get Jimmy his paycheck on time. I don't know who benefit, like how the Butler camp believes they benefit from
Dude,
that. Like a guy that made $250 million in his career missed a paycheck for a week and a half. Like that is not how to get the public on your side. Like, look,
what
we
I'm
told you Miami was bad news.
this is what I'm saying. Once you get to the wire transfer logistics, you've lost the plot. We just need to focus on X's and O's and stay on the court. If you're Spoelstra, what are you thinking about that when that thing comes out, right? Like he's trying to be the best coach of the NBA, coach up this group, try to have them be overachieving. And we're hearing stuff about like, oh, direct deposit delays. Give me a break.
the direct, I legitimately laughed out loud at that.
It's
Like
crazy.
they didn't, like you think like Mickey Arison is hurting for money. Like this isn't like the Walter Brown Celtics era where you
Are they good for it? Are they good for it? What do you think?
are they gonna pay? Are they gonna pay? Like, however can I make rent if I don't have that paycheck in August? Like I just that was that's a bad leak. That's a leak that if you're Butler's side, you want back. Like you want to keep that to yourself because that does not get anybody on your side. I do think, Ben, it's complicated because I don't know what version of Jimmy Butler comes back to this team. Like there's a scenario that Butler comes back and says, you know what? I tried everything. My trade's not going to happen. I'm going to kick ass for the rest of the season. I'm going to lead this team to the playoffs. And then you're going to see playoff Jimmy. Here he comes. I'm going to lead this team deep into the postseason, and I'm going to show Miami that they should give me an extension. Or if it's not Miami, maybe it's somebody else that acquires me before the draft or whatever, tack on in a couple of years to that deal. There's also a scenario that we get like the mopey version of him, the guy we saw before the suspension. Because if you're Jimmy Butler, like the worst case scenario for you is that you opt into your deal this summer and be guaranteed $52 million for next year. That would be the concern if I'm Miami, like not being sure exactly what version of Jimmy Butler I'm going to get.
Well, and they've been concerned about that. I mean, the whole reporting about how many different incidents had kind of led up to the actual suspension. It wasn't just one thing towards the end. It sounded like they had felt things had been disrupted. There was a pattern of behavior there. I don't know how you regain that trust if you felt the need to suspend him for 7 games, which is an outrageously long suspension by NBA standards for off-court behavior, from a team, right? So that's what I'm saying. I just don't think it's worth it. Like at least punt it to the trade deadline and then pick up the pieces from there, see where your record stands. And I do think if you're Miami, like it's time to start thinking about what life is like without Jimmy, right? I mean, he's made it very clear he wants out. I think that there's some scenarios where if you're not taking back too much money, you get a rotation player here, a pick there. That's not the end of the world for a guy who's 35 years old and, kind of in the latter stages of his career. If you don't want to be on the hook for that money, like getting some assets back could wind up being helpful. That's typically how these things go when you get to the trade deadline. This one's weird because it happened so early because the feelings got so raw, but I just would not rush back to ask those questions you're talking about, which is, well, which version are we going to get? Well, it's probably not a version you're going to like based on how like the last 9 months have gone. So why even tempt fate?
I do also like the transparency with Butler's approach. For a while, and I've been reporting this, others reported too, that it's been Phoenix or bust for Butler. He wanted to go to Phoenix, not because he's got a lifelong dream of playing with Kevin Durant, but because he knows Matt Ishbia would open up the wallet, open up the checkbook, and give him the money that he's looking for. I think Butler's team has realized that's probably not going to happen. Like, there's no interest from Miami in taking on Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal, as I said last week, is not going to waive his no trade clause to go to a rebuilding team as a third team facilitator. So the Suns are stuck. Like a Nick Richards deal is about the extent of what the Suns can do to improve that team. Now, our friend Sam Amick, I think, was the one that said this, said that, Milwaukee's kind of in play now. Well, I wonder why. Like, it's not because he wants to play with Dame and Giannis. It's that the Bucks, who have a couple of 30-something stars, have that championship window open, and maybe they'd be willing to pay Jimmy to stay for 2 more years after that. This is entirely about money. Everything that gets leaked out there, it all comes back to money with Jimmy Butler. So I think Miami's going to have a tough decision to make. Again, people will probably know of that decision by the time they listen to this show, but it's going to be interesting how they approach Jimmy now that the suspension is ultimately up. All right, let's talk about the Golden State Warriors, who are 20-20 as we record this, 10th in the Western Conference. The Warriors front office has been aggressively pursuing other deals for the better part of the last year. We know they chased Paul George last summer, Lauri Markkanen. They kicked the tires on Jimmy Butler. Over the last few days, you have had the remnants of the Warriors championship dynasty surprisingly saying that they are not looking for this team to make a desperation win now type of deal. Effectively saying, don't get desperate. Don't mortgage the future. Don't sacrifice what this team could be when we're gone for a short-term fix right now. Let's start there, Ben, because these comments, which came from Draymond Green, from Steph Curry, from Steve Kerr, not your typical comments that come from veterans on a team that wants to compete for a championship. What did you make of the comments from those three?
Well, what you're saying is usually in that situation, whether it's the players or the coach, they're saying we want to, get whatever we can to make a run this year. And they're kind of going the other way and saying, hey, our future is really important to us. And you're sitting around thinking like, are you even going to be here for that future? And I think Steve Kerr in one of his comments even said, well, I might not be here, but we still owe it to the organization to, take the long-term view rather than just mortgage things for the short term. I take a couple things out of it. First of all, I think there's a realistic acknowledgement from those characters. They're not one piece away. There is no magic trade, unless you're somehow getting Giannis and Wemby together, that's going to put this team in position to compete for a title this year. So I think that's good because these comments just kind of lower the temperature. I just feel it's been a little toxic around the Golden State Warriors. The conversation has, not them, but the expectations of, oh, we have to do this for Steph. Oh, you have to make another run. Like, yeah, in theory, but if there's no trades out there that are really going to accomplish that, if your group is just kind of average and not that great, which is where their group is, and Steph is no longer where he was even during that 2022 championship run, in my opinion, in terms of night-to-night impact, he has to pace himself more. His numbers are a little bit down. To me, it's just in everybody's best interest to cool the temperature and say, hey, like, chill out. We're not going to mortgage everything right now. Don't have that expectation. Now, the fans didn't take it that way. The fans took it, oh, you're punting on the season. We don't want you guys to punt on the season. And I think you've seen some cleanup work, especially from Kerr over the last couple of days to say, hey, look, it's not like we're giving up here. We're just trying to be realistic. I think ultimately the die was cast for Golden State last summer. They really cut costs, did they not? They let Chris Paul go. They let Klay Thompson go. At that point, everyone should have realized this is not going to be a 2025 contender. Okay, they're just trying to rebalance the books, retool a little bit, and try to get back to a more sustainable plan. And by the way, they spent so much money on luxury taxes over these last 5 years. Can we really blame them for wanting to do that? It got really, really expensive here, and I think pretty much every organization has to go through some cutbacks every once in a while, even the NBA's richest organizations.
Yeah, and to give them credit to, like, they did make good faith efforts to get Paul George. They did make an effort to get Lauri Markkanen. Like, those are real. Like, they couldn't. Like,
would that have mattered? Like, does that put them into a championship picture? Let's say they had even done it. Like, Paul George has been one of the worst moves of the offseason at the price he got. I mean, let's be real. Lauri Markkanen, I like him as a player a lot. I think he would have been a great fit for Golden State. He'd be a great fit a lot of places. He's not having the best season, right? Like, does that really boost them up to the top tier of the West? Oklahoma City is still running away from them, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. That brings me to the greater point that I don't know that there is any move they can make that puts them into that Oklahoma City tier or makes them competitive. I mean, they're something like 8-17 since Thanksgiving. The offense has been bad. Dennis Schroeder has not helped in that regard. The Buddy Hield honeymoon is over out in Golden State. He's around 30% from three over the last month and a half. I've seen a lot about Nikola Vucevic. maybe make a difference. They probably could use a stretch five. That would probably help Steph and help some of those guys out there. I mean, Vucevic has his own defensive issues, so there's that. But I don't know that they have that there's a move that instantly makes them a contender. That's why, like, we hate to say, we hate to, fans don't want to hear about punting on a season, but it might not be the worst thing in the world for this team to finish in the lottery because you can go into the summer with a lottery pick. And maybe if you want to run this back one more time, you take one more run with this group, the last dance of what's left of the Warriors, and see if you can make an addition in the offseason. Because right now, there is no deal that can make them a championship team. And look, some of that is it is some cost cutting. I agree with you there, but they've paid the price for some not so good draft picks over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, the highlight is James Wiseman, who was a catastrophe in Golden State. They could have had LaMelo Ball among others and done a lot with someone like that. But they draft Wiseman. He's gone a couple of years later. They get virtually nothing in return. The Moses Moody pick, he's okay. Kuminga looks pretty good, but there's some other guys they passed on in that draft that might have been better fits for this team. So, that they've missed those opportunities to kind of push this window open organically when they had a chance. And look, having the number 2 pick in the draft in 2020 was a chance. Like, that was your opportunity to really stretch this window out any further, and they couldn't do it. So I think my thought is, don't do anything crazy. Come back next summer and figure out what you can do with this group. That's got to be the only thing you can do.
Yeah, I take the long-term approach here too. I get why you make these comments if you're Steph and those guys, because they want to just live life day to day, not under the shadow of like, oh, you guys have to do something, or this like anger or this fury from the fan base of like, oh, we're not trying. So you're just trying to reset the conversation. I think that makes sense. To me, for Golden State to ever reopen a championship window, it's about trying to be a landing pad organization, sort of like the Lakers became for LeBron James. I think that's really where their next championship window would come from, because as great as Steph still is, like I wonder, okay, well, does he have enough around him currently to compete for titles? Clearly not. Or even if you're bringing in a new number 2, like we were saying with Paul George or Larry Markkinen, is that enough? Probably not. So the way you would do it is you get some massive megastar who's looking for a change of scenery, and Golden State is prepared. They've kind of created the opportunity for that player to come, and then all of a sudden it's his team and they're going forward. It's going to take years for something like that to play out. And so that's why the long-term viewpoint makes a lot of sense to me. I would not be, going out of my way to sell valuable draft picks or young players at this deadline for a short-term boost. It just seems, kind of backwards thinking. And it's tough because that organization and fan base is really used to winning for a long time, but the NBA doesn't work that way. You don't get to win forever. Think about all the pain. You were talking about Boston's great 6-year run. Think about the pain in the years before that, right? Where it's like there's rebuilding years, you're retooling. Brad's got to build things up brick by brick. And I think that's sort of the future that Golden State's looking at.
Yeah, and the Celtics got really lucky with the way the Nets collapsed.
No Wisemans. No Wisemans.
No Wisemans there. I mean, they started drafting stretchy wings before it was really all that cool, and it worked out for them. And look, with the Celtics, like their turn is coming too at some point. Like, they can't survive with a $500 million payroll for forever. They've probably got, if their ownership's willing to spend, 2-3 more years left with the group they've got, but they're going to face the same things. I don't want to go down the trade Steph rabbit hole, not just yet, but gut feeling with Steph Curry having 2.5 years left on his contract, which is probably going to take him to the end of his career. Do you think that Steph finishes his career as a Warrior?
I do. Call me a romantic, but I think that's how it's going to play out. I've never seen him suggest, hint, body language. I look at all that stuff really carefully, right? And I just have never really seen it get to a breaking point. I think, he's got so much of his own personal, whether you want to call it brand or legacy, tied up with that organization. Like the idea of him being able to walk off the court for his final game, like Kobe walked off with the Lakers or like Tim Duncan walked off with the Spurs. It's just too pretty of a picture. I don't even want to really contemplate the alternatives. Although I know people are doing that. I understand why they're doing it, but I cannot really see Steph Curry in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers phase, like some people have referenced with Tom Brady, or the Washington Wizards phase for a Michael Jordan. I just can't see it. I can't picture it.
No, I can't either. And if you're Steph, like you wouldn't leave to chase a ring. You got four of them, right? Like
Yeah,
your legacy is
you're
secured.
good.
You're good. It would suck to watch Steph Curry on like a 9 seed for the next 2 years. But even if that's the case, I'm with you. I think he finished his career in Golden State. All right, last thing for you, Ben. I want to talk for a minute about the Houston Rockets. Fourth best record in the NBA. Really surprising everybody. Ime Udoka is coaching his ass off this year, having a great. If not for Kenny Atkinson, I think Ime Udoka would be the clear front runner for Coach of the Year, and he might. Who knows? Who knows how this could all play out in the second half of the season? Jalen Green is playing well. Their defense is elite. When you're talking about a second seed in the conference, you should be talking about a real contender in the conference. Do you think right now we're looking at a real contender in the Houston Rockets?
I don't, but they have proven me wrong at every single step of the way so far this season. I've been predicting that they were going to slow down or fall off, come back to earth basically every single month, and I've been wrong every single time. So congratulations to eBay and company down there for doing that. I will continue to dig at my heels in and say I just don't know if they've got the championship formula quite right. You look at in terms of the pecking order on offense. I still think there's questions. I know Jalen Green's been sensational these last couple of weeks, but zoom out, there's so much inconsistency there with him. Fred VanVleet's got a lot to prove to me in the Western Conference playoffs if he's going to be able to keep up with some of the star power in those kinds of matchups. Now, to me, the most interesting development about this group, and it's more of a long-term development rather than a short-term development, I think Amen Thompson is not only their best prospect in terms of star potential, their best long-term player. I think he might be their best player right now in terms of all-around contributions. It's awesome to see him get into the starting role. The numbers have been spectacular since he's moved into that starting role. And Ime, he better not ever go back to the bench for the rest of his career. Okay, this guy has sky high potential. He impacts the games in so many different ways. It's so challenging in the modern NBA to be a legit star who can't shoot. And I think that's the trajectory that he's kind of on. I mean, he does literally everything else. He's a great facilitator. He's great off the ball. He can score, chip in around the edges, incredible defensive presence, and he has a great motor. Very few star level players play as hard as Ahmed Thompson does every single night. I think that's going to be his calling card. And so more than anything about Houston, whether or not they're contenders this year, they might have really found one with Ahmed Thompson.
Oh, no question. His brother as well. They're both elite defensive players.
Yeah.
There's something. They're just dogs out there. They're tough. They're athletic, and they can defend multiple positions. I, I was texting with a couple of coaches before we started recording out in the West, asking them the same question, and both of them thought this was a team that maybe could win a series, but that's about their ceiling at this point. And both of them said the same thing about why. They said the defense, which made me scratch my head at first because they're a top five defense. They've got some high level defensive guys led by Thompson. Dylan Brooks can defend as well, but they have a couple of key positions. You mentioned Fred VanVleet. I think in certain matchups in the West, he'd have a lot of problems defensively. Alperen Sengun, same thing. He's been better defensively than I think anybody expected. But in the postseason, these coaches that we're talking to were like, that's a guy that can be exploited at that position. So I think this is the kind of year where with the right matchup, they can win a first round series. But then they get into a second round series against a Denver or against a Dallas or against any of these top tier teams in the West. I think they're gonna have a lot of problems. And look, that's kind of normal, isn't it? Like,
Oh yeah.
they're kind of this is the playbook. Like you get a bunch of young talent, you get to that 500 mark that they got to last year, you get to the postseason this year, get your ass kicked this year by somebody, and you learn from that, and you come back, and a year next year, you're a real contender. I think that's where the Rockets are right now. I was amazed, Ben. They're 24-3 when they have a lead going into the fourth quarter. Because I look at this team, and my biggest concern, at least offensively, is like, who's going to close games for them? Like, is it going to be Jalen Green who can win these games in the fourth quarter? They've been doing a lot of offensive by committee for most of the season. They got a bunch of guys averaging like 11, 12 points per game. I was amazed to see they have been closing games when leading in the fourth quarter, but I think that's going to be something that comes up in the playoffs as well. I think this is the year that they learn what they are and they learn what they need. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, this is exactly where they're kind of supposed to be, where Oklahoma City was a couple of years ago, where Memphis has been. These teams that, have strong regular seasons and then take some lumps in the playoffs. But defense at key positions, fourth quarter closing options. Those are two things that you really need to go deep in the postseason, and I'm not sure they're there yet in Houston.
Well, and outside shooting too, I think goes along with that. If the games are slowing down a little bit, there's not as much points coming in transition, half court execution. Do you have the knockdown shooters who are going to be able to stretch out other teams' defenses and really make them work? And once you start to play these chess match games where your guys are getting picked on and you're trying to pick on the other team's games, guys, who's going to be able to step up and knock those shots down? I still don't trust Jalen Green, and I'm sure that's not a controversial opinion for people outside of Houston. People inside of Houston probably right now are like, "What? Are you crazy?" Van Vliet, had a great run with Toronto, but it hasn't had a lot of other playoff success since then. And I think the tricky part is when you go into those playoff series, if you're going against Joker in Denver, you're going against Luka in Dallas, like the gap between your opposing best player and your best player is huge, right? And rarely do you see teams upset in that fashion, right? Like it would have to be a situation where a lot of the Nuggets are injured, or maybe Luka's not quite right in Dallas yet, for me to really believe that Houston would be able to pull this off. A good example is that Grizzlies team from a couple years ago going against the Lakers. The Lakers just kind of big brothered them. They had the better top end talent. The Grizzlies were the better team, quote unquote, during the regular season. I'd be worried about something like that happening with this Houston group, depending on the matchup. But look, if they stay as the 2 seed the whole way through, and they've really been consistent with that, they're going to get a team coming out of the play-in tournament. They're going to get a team that's not quite on their level in terms of probably depth of talent. They're going to have a shot. I don't want to write them off, but I do think it's going to, when they get to the deep end of the pool, that's where it's going to get tricky.
Yeah, and some of their regular season success, I think, is partly attributed to continuity and health, right? Like they brought like 13 guys back from last season's team. I think they've only used like 4 different starting lineups this year. Like they've been able to keep this unit together, and they've been able to develop good chemistry. And that's big when winning regular season games. And a lot of teams are ravaged by injury and going through a bunch of different lineups. The postseason, a little bit of a different story. Rotation shortened. Teams are what they are. I'm with you. Like the right matchup, first round, they get through. And after that, everything else is gravy. Like everything else is just icing on the cake.
Well, that was OKC last year, kind of, right? I mean, they cruise through the first round, and then they get into a real tough series, and they narrowly lose. There's no shame in that, and they come back, and they're one of the best teams in the league again, right? I think that's sort of what you want to be if you're Houston.
Do you think, I mean, we're starting to see some reporting now that maybe the Rockets are a little more open than they previously let on about making a midseason trade. I mean, like everybody's looking at Phoenix right now and wondering what the Suns are going to do. Like they're just such a dumpster fire. And we kind of joked about Nick Richards. Like Nick Richards is a good player. I don't see him moving the needle considerably in Phoenix.
Yeah.
But like now we've known the Rockets are into Kevin Durant. I just don't see the Suns blowing this up this year. Now, maybe you get to the summer and it's a different story, but I don't see Matt Ishbia waving the white flag a year and a half into this grand experiment he's doing in Phoenix. And the Rockets, if I was Raphael Stone, who's done a tremendous job putting this team together, I'd want to see what my team's got. Like I'd want some, to borrow a Prestiism, want some more data on this team. Like I'd want to see like who works in the playoffs, who doesn't, kind of what this team needs when they go into like a gut check series against a Denver or Dallas or Minnesota or whoever it may be that they might face in a second round series. I just want to learn more. I wouldn't make a knee jerk move, maybe give up too much for something that doesn't get them to a championship level. Cause I don't think anything does this year. I still think whatever they do at the deadline would put them behind Oklahoma City, behind Boston in the East, Cleveland in the East. I think their attitude early on was the right one, and that mindset was the right one. Let's just play this thing out and see what we got. I mean, they still haven't seen anything from Reed Shepherd, who was, some people had like pegged as rookie of the year.
They got no minutes for him.
no minutes for him at all. Like, and he, yeah. I'd kind of want to play this thing out. I don't know about you, but I'd like to see what this team can do over the course of a full season plus the playoffs, and then, take a step back, reevaluate, see what you got in this offseason.
I think human nature factors into it, right? They know what the other side looks like. They went through a really painful rebuild. Need I remind anybody of the Kevin Porter Jr. era, right? I mean, that was tough times all the way around for Houston. So why would they shake things up in a big way when things are going so perfectly, so smoothly, and all their key guys are on the upswing of their careers? Look, I mean, we know Van Vliet and Dylan Brooks to a certain degree are placeholder players, right? But everybody else is still kind of figuring out who they are in terms of just the age curve. And so why you would try to shake up that in a meaningful way, I don't know why you would do that right now. Maybe some trade around the edges to fortify for the playoffs, but that's something else we've seen, by the way, from Oklahoma City in past years, right? Pretty quiet trade deadlines, minor moves, not really trying to shake things, get that data that you described. I feel like Houston's going to take a similar approach.
Shout out again to Ime Udoka, who in his first year as head coach in Boston takes him to the finals. In his first year in Houston, gets a 22-win team to 500. Second year, he's got him with the fourth best record right now in the Western Conference with a defense that's elite. This guy can coach, man. Like, he can really coach. And you give him the right personnel, which I think the Rockets have done, like those tough-minded guys like a Brooks, like a Thompson, like a Van Vliet to a certain extent. He's going to win with those guys. Like, he's going to win. And how he's reformed this team into an elite defensive team with, young guys like Sengun and Green and others there. It's pretty remarkable, man. It really is. He's proven to be in just 2.5 years as a head coach, to proven to be a pretty damn good one.
Yeah, my top three for my midseason awards for Coach of the Year: one, Kenny Atkinson; two, Ime Udoka; three, JB Bickerstaff. I mean, pretty much similar thread, all overachieving in a big time way, all demonstrable improvement from each group that you can attribute to the coach, right? Whether it's just improving the offense in Detroit, coaxing some better defensive energy and effort from the Pistons guys. And with Ime, it's just a complete culture 180 from the disorganization they had a couple years ago. Obviously, Kenny Atkinson, we don't really need to explain it. They're on a 71 win pace. I'm pretty sure he's going to win that award, but Ime definitely deserves his flowers on this one.
Shout out to JB Bickerstaff, too. I know I got some people in Detroit pissed at me last week when I suggested that Bradley Beal would not approve a deal to a rebuilding team like Charlotte and Detroit. I apologize for lumping you in with the Hornets. We did a whole segment on the Pistons last week. I'm amazed by what they've done. Cade Cunningham is an all-star this year. Might even be a starter on the all-star team this year.
That's your muscle memory, though. It's been a while for Detroit, hasn't it? I mean, when Detroit's been down there in that Charlotte tier for a while, and it's nice to see them jump out of it. It's one of the best stories of the whole year.
It is. And I wrote in our preview issue that guys that have coached Cade in the past and coaches that have watched Cade, not to make this a Detroit topic here, but one thing they've said is if this guy can just stay on the floor, if he can just show some toughness, he's got all the talent. The talent's there. And you've seen the comps to Luka with his body control. And you're just seeing just his ability to stay out there on the floor is more than half the battle for this team. Because when he's out there, he's so damn good. So damn good. So he's having a great year for the Pistons. Ben, good stuff, man. Always appreciate taking some time to join me here on the pod.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Chris. Take care, man.